Somewhere beneath the frozen soil of Belgium, in a cellar so dark that your eyes would never adjust, something is growing. It has no access to sunlight. Not a single photon reaches its surface. It sits in complete, absolute blackness. The kind of darkness that presses against your skin. There is no soil beneath it, no fertilizer, no irrigation system, just damp air and silence. And yet, in this impossible environment, a vegetable is forming. Pale, tender, crisp, growing not toward light, but away from it, becoming more delicate, more valuable, with every hour it spends in the dark. This vegetable was discovered by accident almost 200 years ago. It was once the pride of European cuisine. Chefs paid premium prices for its subtle, slightly bitter crunch. And today, most people have never heard its name. Walk into any modern supermarket. You will find tomatoes grown in heated greenhouses, lettuce shipped across continents in refrigerated trucks, strawberries available in January, thousands of miles from where they were picked. But this vegetable, the one that requires no sunlight and no soil, is nowhere to be found. This is the story of the food that broke every rule of agriculture, and the reasons it vanished from your table. Welcome to the vault. In the winter of 1850, somewhere in the countryside outside Brussels, a Belgian farmer descended into his root cellar. He had stored chicory roots there months earlier, planning to use them for a coffee substitute, as was common practice during that era. But when he reached the bottom of the stairs, he found something he did not expect. The forgotten roots had sprouted. In the complete absence of light, they had pushed out pale, tightly wrapped leaves, not green, but white, almost ghostly. They looked nothing like the chicory plants he had grown in his fields. Curious, he tasted one. The bitterness he expected was barely there. Instead, the leaves were crisp, mild, slightly nutty. Delicate in a way that field-grown chicory could never achieve. The texture was unlike anything he had eaten before. Tender yet firm. Moist yet not watery. He brought the strange sprouts upstairs. His family tasted them. Then his neighbors. Word spread through the village. Within months, farmers across the region were experimenting with their own root cellars. He did not realize it at the time, but he had just discovered one of the most unusual vegetables in agricultural history. A vegetable that would challenge everything botanists understood about how plants grow. The Belgians called it witloof. In their language, it means white leaf. The French would later call it endive. The Dutch called it Brussels loaf. But the name mattered less than the method. This vegetable did not grow like anything else. To understand why this discovery was so remarkable, you need to understand how plants normally function. Every green plant on Earth relies on photosynthesis. Light hits the leaves. Chlorophyll absorbs that light. The plant converts carbon dioxide and water into sugar. That sugar fuels growth. No light means no photosynthesis. No photosynthesis means no growth. This is elementary biology. This is the rule that governs nearly every farm, every garden, every greenhouse on the planet. And this vegetable breaks that rule completely. The process works like this. First, chicory seeds are planted in open fields during spring. They grow throughout the summer, developing large green leaves and deep taproots. Those taproots store energy, packing themselves with nutrients absorbed from months of sunlight. In autumn, the farmer harvests those roots, but not to eat them, to store them. The roots are moved into dark forcing rooms. No windows, no artificial light. Temperature and humidity are carefully controlled. The roots are placed in water or damp peat, standing upright in rows. And then, something remarkable happens. The roots begin to sprout, not using light, because there is none, They use the stored energy from the summer, the sugars and starches packed inside the taproot. They push that energy upward, forming tight, compact heads of pale leaves. Because there is no light, no chlorophyll develops. The leaves remain white or pale yellow. The bitterness that sunlight would create stays locked away. What emerges is mild, tender, and uniquely crisp. In 3 to 4 weeks, the heads are ready. Harvested by hand in the darkness. Each one a small miracle of stored solar energy released months after the sun last touched the parent plant. The entire process happens underground or in sealed rooms. Workers often use red light during harvest because the vegetable cannot detect red wavelengths. White light would trigger chlorophyll production and ruin weeks of careful work. Even a few minutes of exposure can begin the greening process. This is not hydroponics. This is not vertical farming with LED lights. This is something older, simpler, a method that requires nothing but roots, darkness, and time. A method that transforms a bitter field crop into a delicate culinary ingredient using only the absence of light. For over a century, Belgian endive was considered a delicacy. By the late 1800s, Belgium had perfected the forcing technique. Farmers built specialized cellars. They developed precise temperature controls. They bred chicory varieties specifically optimized for winter forcing. The expertise became a point of national pride. Belgium, a small country often overlooked on the world stage, had developed something no other nation had mastered. The forcing rooms became a source of identity. Families guarded their methods. Villages competed for the whitest leaves, the tightest heads, the mildest flavor. The vegetable even earned a royal endorsement. Belgian royalty served it at state dinners. It appeared at banquets across Europe, a symbol of Belgian agricultural ingenuity. By the early 1900s, Witloof had become one of Belgium's most valuable agricultural exports. It appeared on the menus of fine restaurants across Europe. Chefs prized its versatility. It could be eaten raw in salads, braised with butter, wrapped around ham and baked with cheese. It could be grilled, roasted, or served with cream sauces. Its firm structure held up to cooking in ways that other salad greens could not. The texture was unlike any other vegetable. Crisp but not watery. Substantial but not heavy. The flavor walked a perfect line between bitter and sweet. And because it was harvested in winter, when most fresh vegetables were unavailable, it commanded premium prices. A luxury product that emerged from darkness while snow covered the fields above. France embraced it fully. The French called it chicon or endive and built their own forcing industry. By the mid-20th century, France and Belgium together produced hundreds of thousands of tons annually. The vegetable had become a staple of winter cuisine across Western Europe. What happened? Why did this remarkable vegetable fade from global awareness? The answer is not conspiracy. It is economics. Belgian endive is extraordinarily labor-intensive to produce. Every step requires human hands. The roots must be dug carefully to avoid damage. They must be sorted by size. They must be placed individually in the forcing rooms. The temperature must be monitored constantly. The harvest must happen in complete darkness, each head cut by hand. None of this can be easily mechanized. Modern agriculture rewards scale. It rewards uniformity. It rewards crops that can be planted by machine, sprayed by machine, harvested by machine, and shipped in standardized containers across global supply chains. Belgian endive fits none of these criteria. The forcing rooms cannot be scaled infinitely. The harvest cannot be automated. The product is fragile, bruising easily during transport. The shelf life is limited because exposure to light causes the leaves to turn green and bitter within days. Compare this to iceberg lettuce. Planted by machine. harvested by machine, wrapped in plastic, shipped in refrigerated trucks, lasting weeks on supermarket shelves, sold for a fraction of the price. From a pure efficiency standpoint, iceberg lettuce wins. It wins in every metric that modern food distribution cares about. And so, Belgian endive slowly retreated. Not because people stopped enjoying it, but because the systems that deliver food to your table were not designed for it. The supermarkets optimized for volume. The supply chains optimized for durability. The consumers, offered fewer and fewer options, forgot that alternatives existed. The younger generation never learned about forcing. They never saw their grandparents descend into cellars in January and emerge with armfuls of pale, perfect heads. The technique became specialized knowledge, passed down only in farming families who maintained the old ways. Agricultural schools stopped teaching it. Why? Classroom time to a method that could not be industrialized? Why train students in techniques that had no place in modern food production? The curriculum narrowed. The knowledge contracted. And slowly, quietly, the vegetable that grows in darkness faded into darkness itself. Today, Belgium and France still produce witloof. Small farms maintain the traditional methods. Specialty stores stock it during winter months. High-end restaurants feature it on seasonal menus. But for most of the world, this vegetable has become invisible. A ghost crop. Grown in darkness, sold in shadows, known only to those who specifically seek it out. And here is what makes this story worth telling. We live in an era obsessed with indoor farming, with controlled environment agriculture, with the promise of growing food anywhere, regardless of climate or season. Companies raise millions of dollars to build vertical farms with LED lights. They speak of revolutionizing agriculture, of freeing food production from the constraints of weather and geography. And meanwhile, a technique that achieves something similar, using no electricity, no artificial lighting, just stored root energy and careful darkness, sits forgotten in old Belgian cellars. This is not to say modern technology is wrong. LED farming has its place. But there is something worth examining in our rush toward the new. We often forget what already worked. The Belgians solved the problem of winter vegetables 2 centuries ago. They did it with cellars dug into hillsides, with roots harvested in autumn, with darkness as a tool rather than an obstacle. No patents were needed, no complex supply chains, no venture capital, just observation, patience, and an understanding of how plants store and release energy. That knowledge still exists. The technique still works. The seeds are still available. What disappeared was not the method. What disappeared was the memory. So what can you do with this information? First, know that Belgian endive, witloof, is still grown. If you live in Europe, you can find it in winter markets. In North America, specialty grocers sometimes stock it. The price reflects the labor involved, but it remains available for those who look. Second, understand that this technique can be applied at home. Chicory roots can be forced in a basement, a closet, any space that can be kept dark and cool. Gardeners have been doing this for generations. The process is simple, requiring no special equipment. Third, recognize that this is just one example. Many traditional techniques for extending harvests, for growing food in unexpected conditions, have been pushed aside by industrial standardization. They were not replaced because they failed. They were replaced because they did not scale. The knowledge remains. In old farming manuals, in regional traditions, in the memories of grandparents who grew food before supermarkets dominated. Finding that knowledge requires effort, but it exists, waiting for anyone curious enough to dig it up. The vegetable that grows in complete darkness never needed sunlight. It never needed soil in its final form. It needed only what the root had already gathered. Stored energy, patient release, time measured in weeks rather than seasons. It challenged every assumption about how food must be grown, and for a century it succeeded beautifully. Then the world moved on, not because the vegetable failed, but because the system changed. Speed mattered more than craft, volume mattered more than flavor, efficiency mattered more than resilience. The cellars went quiet, the forcing rooms emptied, the white leaves retreated to the margins. But they are still there, growing in darkness, waiting for the world to remember. 0 sunlight, 0 soil, 200 years of proof. And now you know the vegetable that the modern food system forgot. If this changed how you think about what is possible in agriculture, consider subscribing. There are more stories buried beneath the surface, more foods hiding in plain sight, more questions that nobody seems to be asking. Welcome to the Vault.